The dust clouds stretched toward the horizon as far as Ramona Everett could see. The last remnants of the wagon train she'd traveled with, now just a memory swallowed by the vast Wyoming territory. Blood trickled from her temple, her body broken in too many places to count as she lay half buried in the hot sand. The outlaws had taken everything, her possessions, her dignity, and soon they would have her life as the merciless sun beat down upon her battered form. It was 1877, and the promise of a new life in Hecla, Wyoming territory, had drawn Ramona away from her sheltered existence in Boston. At 22, she'd been naive enough to believe that determination alone could conquer the untamed West. Now, as consciousness flickered like a dying flame, she wondered if anyone would ever know what happened to the schoolteacher who never arrived. Xavier Prescott had seen his share of death in his 30 years. The war between the states had claimed his youth, and the unforgiving frontier had hardened what remained. His weathered features bore witness to years spent beneath the open sky, herding cattle and avoiding the trappings of civilization whenever possible. But something instinct, perhaps, or divine intervention drew his attention to an unusual shape in the distance as he rode across the plains. "Whoa there, Justice," he murmured to his chestnut stallion, squinting against the harsh glare. The horse slowed, nostrils flaring as they approached what Xavier initially thought might be an abandoned bundle of clothes. The moment he recognized the form as human, Xavier dismounted with the fluid grace of a man born to the saddle. His spurs jangled as he knelt beside the woman's still form, his calloused fingers gentle as they brushed dust from her face. Blood had dried in her auburn hair, and her skin was blistered from exposure, yet somehow, impossibly, a pulse fluttered at her throat. "Madam," Xavier said softly, receiving no response. "Madam, can you hear me?" Ramona's eyelids fluttered but remained closed. Xavier wasted no time, retrieving his canteen and moistening her cracked lips. With practiced efficiency, he assessed her injuries: broken ribs most likely, severe dehydration, and possibly a fractured arm. It was a miracle she still breathed. Xavier gathered the unconscious woman into his arms, careful not to cause further injury, and secured her to his saddle before mounting behind her. His ranch was closest, a day's ride at most if they pushed hard. "Hang on," he whispered, though he doubted she could hear him. "This ain't the end for you. Not today." As Xavier guided his horse toward home, one arm supporting the stranger who now depended on him for survival, he had no way of knowing how profoundly this moment would alter the course of his solitary life. This woman, barely clinging to life, had just become his responsibility. And Xavier Prescott never shirked his responsibilities. The journey back to Xavier's ranch passed in a blur of dust and determination. Every time the woman's breathing faltered, Xavier would slow Justice's pace, murmuring reassurances to both the horse and his unconscious charge. Twice he stopped to trickle water between her parched lips, watching with relief as her throat worked reflexively to swallow. Night was falling when Xavier finally spotted the familiar silhouette of his modest homestead, nestled against a backdrop of pine-covered hills. The main house was sturdy, if unassuming a testament to its owner's practical nature, with a barn and corral standing nearby. No lamplight shone from within. Xavier rarely bothered lighting lamps when he lived alone. "Martha," Xavier called out as he approached, his voice echoing across the silent property. Moments later, the door to a small cabin behind the main house swung open, revealing a stout woman in her 60s. "Lord Almighty, Xavier, what have you found now?" Martha exclaimed, hurrying toward him as quickly as her arthritic legs would carry her. Martha Hopkins had been with Xavier since he purchased the ranch 5 years prior. The widow of a Union soldier who'd served alongside Xavier, she kept his house and cooked his meals in exchange for the cabin and a modest wage. More importantly, she provided the rare human connection Xavier allowed himself these days. Found her half dead in the dust about 20 miles east, Xavier explained, carefully dismounting while supporting the woman's limp form. Been left for dead, I reckon. Martha's weathered face creased with concern as she reached up to touch the unconscious woman's cheek. Poor child's burning up. Get her inside, quickly now. Xavier carried Ramona into the main house, following Martha's directions to place her on his own bed. While Martha bustled about gathering supplies, Xavier stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed, hat in hand. She needs tending, Martha said pointedly. Woman's tending, you fetched Doc Sullivan from town. Xavier hesitated. It's a 2-hour ride to Hecla and in the dark, and this girl might not see morning without proper care, Martha interrupted firmly. I'll do what I can, but she needs the doctor. Xavier nodded once, jamming his hat back onto his head. I'll be back by midnight if I push just as hard. See that you are, Martha replied, already turning her attention to the unconscious woman. And Xavier, she called as he reached the door, bring back some of my herbs from the general store, the willow bark especially. The ride to Hecla seemed interminable, even as Xavier pushed justice harder than he normally would. The town had grown considerably in the 3 years since silver had been discovered nearby, transforming from a dusty stagecoach stop into a bustling community of nearly 500 souls. Despite its growth, Xavier avoided town whenever possible, preferring the solitude of his ranch and the company of his cattle. Hecla's main street was still lively despite the late hour, the saloon and gambling hall casting rectangles of light onto the dirt road. Xavier dismounted outside Doc Sullivan's office, tying Justice to the hitching post before pounding on the door. Coming, a voice grumbled from inside. The door swung open to reveal James Sullivan, a man in his 50s with spectacles perched on his nose and suspenders hanging at his sides. Xavier Prescott, don't often see you in town. Need you out at my place, Doc. Found a woman left for dead out on the plains. Sullivan's demeanor shifted immediately to professional concern. Alive, barely. Martha's with her now. Give me 5 minutes to gather my things, Sullivan said, turning back into his office. Xavier used the time to hurry to the general store, relieved to find the owner, Samuel Taylor, just closing up for the night. Xavier. Twice in 1 month must be some kind of record, Taylor joked as he unlocked the door. Need Martha's herbs, Xavier replied tersely. Especially the willow bark. Taylor raised an eyebrow but asked no questions as he gathered the requested items. Trouble out your way. Xavier nodded curtly, placing coins on the counter. Found a woman half dead, bringing Doc out. Taylor whistled low. Any idea who she might be? None. No identifying marks or belongings. Well, there was that schoolteacher expected on yesterday's stage, never showed up. Town council's getting worried. Xavier frowned. Schoolteacher, Boston lady. Name of Everett, I believe, Ramona Everett. Council hired her by mail to teach at the new schoolhouse. Xavier tucked this information away as he collected his purchases and headed back to meet Doc Sullivan, who was already mounting his horse. Ready when you are, Sullivan called, medical bag secured to his saddle. The ride back to the ranch was tense with urgency. Xavier's mind circled around the possibility that the woman he'd found might be Hecla's expected schoolteacher. If so, what had happened to separate her from her escort, and who had left her to die? Martha met them at the door, her expression grave. She's feverish. Been calling out nonsense, but hasn't fully woken. Sullivan moved past her with practiced efficiency, heading straight for the bedroom. Xavier lingered in the doorway, watching as the doctor examined the woman, now cleaned of the worst of the dust and blood. Her auburn hair had been brushed and braided by Martha's careful hands, but her face remained pale beneath angry sunburns. Multiple broken ribs, Sullivan announced after his examination. Left arm fractured, severe dehydration and exposure. She's been beaten rather thoroughly, I'd say. His expression darkened, and there are other injuries consistent with assault. Xavier's jaw tightened, his fists clenching involuntarily at his sides. Will she live? Hard to say, Sullivan replied honestly. The next 24 hours will tell. If she survives until morning, her chances improve considerably. Taylor at the store mentioned a schoolteacher was expected in Hecla yesterday. Never arrived. Name of Ramona Everett. Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. Could be. Right age, I'd say. Refined looking despite her current state. He began unpacking medicines from his bag. I'll stay the night. Between Martha and me, we'll do everything possible. Xavier backed away, suddenly feeling like an intruder in his own home. I'll see to the horses and sleep in the barn. Call if you need anything. The night passed with agonizing slowness. Xavier found sleep elusive, his mind filled with images of the woman's broken form and questions about who might have left her to such a fate. Shortly before dawn, he gave up trying to rest and instead sat on a hay bale cleaning his rifle by the light of a small lantern. She's asking for water, Martha announced from the barn doorway, startling Xavier from his thoughts. Doc thinks she might be turning the corner. Xavier followed Martha back to the house, where Sullivan sat beside the bed, his sleeves rolled up and collar loosened after the long night's vigil. Ah, Xavier, our patient has shown some improvement, still drifting in and out, but she's taken water and seems more responsive. Xavier approached the bed cautiously. The woman's eyes were closed, but her breathing seemed stronger than before. As if sensing his presence, her eyelids fluttered and slowly opened, revealing eyes the color of summer sage. For a moment, she stared uncomprehendingly at the rugged man standing at her bedside. Then fear flooded her gaze, and she tried to shrink away, a small sound of pain escaping her lips at the movement. "You're safe, miss," Xavier said quickly, keeping his distance. "Found you out on the plains yesterday. This here's Doc Sullivan and Martha Hopkins. You're at my ranch near Hecla." The woman's eyes darted between the three faces surrounding her. When she tried to speak, only a rasp emerged. "Easy now," Sullivan cautioned, helping her sip water. "Don't try to talk too much." After moistening her throat, she whispered, Ramona Everett." Xavier exchanged glances with Sullivan. "The schoolteacher," she managed a slight nod before continuing. "Wagon train, ambushed, men in masks," her voice faltered. "Save your strength, Miss Everett," Sullivan advised. "There'll be time for explanations later." Ramona's eyes found Xavier's again. "You found me," Xavier nodded, uncomfortable with her direct gaze. "Yes, madam." "Thank you," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes before exhaustion claimed her once more. "A good sign," Sullivan pronounced as Ramona drifted back to sleep. Her mind seems clear, which suggests no serious head injury despite that nasty gash. "I'll leave medicines and instructions with Martha, but I should return to town. Other patients need attention." "I'll ride in with you," Xavier decided. "Need to inform the town council their schoolteacher's been found and see if the sheriff can round up a posse to track those attackers." Martha snorted. Sheriff Daniels couldn't track a bear through snow, but go on, I'll watch over her. Within the hour, Xavier and Sullivan were on their way to Hecla, the morning sun warming their backs as they rode. Xavier's thoughts remained with the woman Ramona lying in his bed. Something about her vulnerable strength stirred unfamiliar protective instincts within him. It had been years since he'd allowed himself to feel much of anything beyond the basic necessities of survival, yet this stranger had somehow breached the carefully constructed walls around his emotions. Hecla was fully awake when they arrived, the main street bustling with miners heading to their claims and merchants opening their shops for the day's business. Xavier parted ways with Sullivan and headed directly to the sheriff's office, where he found Thomas Daniels, a corpulent man in his 40s, drinking coffee with his feet propped on his desk. "Prescott," Daniels acknowledged without removing his boots from the desk. "What brings you to town twice in one night?" Xavier explained the situation succinctly, watching as Daniels's expression shifted from boredom to concern. "The Boston schoolteacher, you say, council's been in an uproar about her disappearance." Daniels lowered his feet and leaned forward. You're sure it was outlaws, not Indians? Xavier's expression hardened. She mentioned men in masks, spoke of a wagon train ambush. Doc Sullivan confirmed she'd been mistreated. Daniels had the decency to look grim at this implication. Could be the Blackwell gang. They've been hitting travelers between here and Cheyenne for months. Army's been after them, but they know the territory too well. You planning to form a posse? Daniels sighed. With what men, Prescott? Half the able-bodied men in town are either working their claims or protecting the silver shipments. The other half are too drunk to ride straight. He shook his head. I'll telegraph the federal marshal in Cheyenne, best I can do. Xavier wasn't surprised by the sheriff's reluctance, but disappointment churned in his gut nonetheless. I'll be telling the town council about Miss Everett's condition. They should know what happened to their schoolteacher. They're meeting at the hotel dining room this morning, Daniels offered, clearly eager to be rid of Xavier's accusing presence. 9 o'clock sharp. The 5 members of Hecla's town council reacted with a mixture of horror and relief when Xavier interrupted their breakfast meeting with news of Ramona Everett's rescue. My God, Harold Winston, the council chairman and owner of the town's largest mine, exclaimed. And you say she'll recover? Doc Sullivan thinks so, given time and proper care, Xavier replied. She can recover at my boarding house, offered Margaret Wilson, the council's only female member. I'll prepare a room immediately. Xavier shifted uncomfortably. Doc doesn't recommend moving her yet. Says she needs complete rest for at least a week. The council members exchanged glances, clearly uncertain about the propriety of their schoolteacher remaining at a bachelor's ranch, even with Martha as chaperone. Perhaps we could send out a nurse to assist, suggested Thomas Green, the town banker. Martha Hopkins is more capable than any nurse in Hecla, Xavier said firmly. Miss Everett will receive proper care at my ranch until she's well enough to travel. Winston studied Xavier thoughtfully. Very well, Prescott. The council will cover any expenses, of course, and we'll need a full account from Miss Everett when she's able to determine if these outlaws pose an ongoing threat to Hecla. Xavier nodded curtly, anxious to return to his ranch. After purchasing additional supplies Martha might need, he mounted Justice and left town behind, relieved to escape its confining buildings and curious stares. Upon his return, Xavier found Ramona awake and propped against pillows, sipping broth under Martha's watchful eye. Color had returned to her cheeks, though bruises stood out starkly against her pale skin. Mr. Prescott, Ramona acknowledged, her voice stronger than before. I understand I'm imposing on your hospitality. No imposition, madam, Xavier replied, remaining near the doorway. Doc says you need rest before being moved to town. Martha has been telling me how you found me. Ramona's gaze was direct, unsettling in its intensity. I owe you my life, Xavier shifted uncomfortably. Any decent man would have done the same, but it wasn't any man, it was you. Ramona attempted a smile, wincing as the movement pulled at her split lip. I'd like to hear the story from you when you have time. Martha intervened before Xavier could respond. Time enough for stories later. Miss Ramona needs her rest, and you, Xavier Prescott, need a proper meal after riding all night. Xavier gratefully retreated to the kitchen, where Martha soon joined him. She's a fighter, that one, Martha observed as she placed a plate of eggs and bacon before him. Determined to know everything about her situation, despite her condition. Did she say more about what happened? Martha's expression darkened. Seems her stage was met in Cheyenne by a guide hired by the town council. He was to escort her and 2 other travelers to Hecla by wagon. A day out, they were attacked by a group of masked men. The others were killed outright. They took liberties with Miss Ramona before beating her and leaving her for dead. Xavier's appetite vanished. She remembered any identifying details about the attackers. One had a distinctive scar across his neck, she said. Another spoke with a heavy southern accent. Martha shook her head. Poor child, 22 years old and subjected to such barbarity. Sheriff won't raise a posse, Xavier said, anger edging his voice. Says he'll telegraph the federal marshal, but we both know how likely that is to produce results. So what will you do? Martha asked, knowing Xavier too well to believe he would let the matter rest. Xavier pushed his plate away, his expression hardening. Once Miss Everett is stable, I'll track them myself. And leave her here with just me for protection. What if these men learn she survived and come to finish what they started? Xavier hadn't considered this possibility, and the thought of Ramona facing further danger sent a chill through him. I could ask my foreman to stay at the house when I'm tracking, Martha snorted. Miguel's a good man with cattle, but I wouldn't trust him to protect a woman against determined outlaws. She studied Xavier's face. You care what happens to her, that's new for you. Xavier avoided her knowing gaze. It's basic decency, Martha, nothing more. If you say so, Martha replied, clearly unconvinced. Well, I suggest you clean yourself up before spending more time with our guest. You look like something the cat dragged in after a sandstorm. The next few days established a cautious routine. Ramona grew stronger by small increments, graduating from broth to solid food, from brief periods of wakefulness to longer stretches of lucid conversation. Xavier found himself drawn to her bedside more frequently than necessary, initially under the pretense of checking on her recovery, then later simply for the pleasure of her company. Despite her ordeal, Ramona possessed a quiet dignity that impressed him. She spoke little of her attack, focusing instead on her journey west and her hopes for teaching in Hecla. Xavier learned she was the youngest daughter of a Boston merchant who had died the previous year, leaving Ramona with little inheritance but an excellent education. I could have remained in Boston as a companion to my mother, she explained on her 4th day of recovery, now able to sit fully upright in bed. But the advertisement for a schoolteacher in Wyoming territory seemed like an opportunity for independence. Xavier, seated in a chair near the window, raised an eyebrow. Most Eastern women would consider the frontier a poor trade for Boston society. A shadow crossed Ramona's face. Perhaps I was running away as much as running toward something. She absently traced a pattern on the quilt covering her lap. My father arranged a marriage before his death to a business associate 30 years my senior. And your mother supported this? Xavier asked, surprised. My mother believes security trumps happiness, Ramona replied with a small, sad smile. When the Hecla position was offered, I saw my escape. Her smile faded, though perhaps I've merely exchanged one difficult situation for another. You're having second thoughts about teaching here. Ramona considered the question carefully. Not about teaching, but I underestimated the dangers of this territory. My naivety nearly cost me my life. The West can be harsh, Xavier acknowledged, but it also offers freedoms you won't find back east, especially for those willing to learn its ways. Are you offering to teach me, Mr. Prescott? Ramona asked, her tone lighter than before. Xavier found himself smiling, a rare occurrence that seemed to happen more frequently in her presence. I reckon Martha would be a better instructor in frontier survival. I'm just a rancher who prefers the company of cattle to people most days. Yet here you are, conversing with me rather than tending your herd, Ramona observed. Xavier shifted uncomfortably, realizing she was right. Miguel, my foreman, is handling things. Besides, a man can't work from sunup to sundown without rest. Of course, Ramona conceded, though her knowing smile suggested she didn't entirely believe his excuse. In any case, I'm grateful for the company. Being confined to bed is terribly dull. Perhaps tomorrow, if you're feeling stronger, Martha can help you to the porch. Fresh air does wonders for recovery. Ramona's face brightened. I'd like that very much. The following morning dawned clear and mild, perfect for Ramona's first venture outside the bedroom. Xavier had risen early to complete his most pressing tasks, ensuring he would be available when Martha deemed Ramona ready for her excursion to the porch. When Xavier returned to the house mid-morning, he found Martha helping Ramona dress in one of Martha's own simple cotton dresses, modified to fit Ramona's slighter frame. "There you are," Martha greeted him. "Just in time to carry our patient to the porch. My old bones aren't up to the task." Xavier hesitated, suddenly aware of the intimacy of carrying Ramona in his arms again, this time with her awake and aware. "Are you certain you're ready, Miss Everett?" "Quite certain, Mr. Prescott," Ramona replied with determination. "And please, after all you've done, I insist you call me Ramona." Xavier nodded, approaching the bed. "Then I'm Xavier to you." With great care, Xavier lifted Ramona, mindful of her healing ribs and fractured arm. She weighed little, and the scent of lavender soap Martha's doing no doubt filled his senses as Ramona tentatively placed her good arm around his neck for balance. "Comfortable?" he asked, his voice unaccountably rough. "Yes, thank you," Ramona replied, a flush coloring her cheeks. Xavier carried her through the house to the covered porch, where Martha had prepared a comfortable chair with pillows and blankets. As he lowered Ramona into the chair, their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, a current of awareness that left Xavier oddly breathless. "I'll bring some tea," Martha announced, tactfully retreating inside and leaving them alone. Xavier moved to the porch railing, suddenly finding it difficult to look directly at Ramona. The morning sunlight gilded her auburn hair, emphasizing the delicate structure of her face beneath the fading bruises. "Your ranch is beautiful," Ramona commented, breaking the silence. "So different from what I imagined Wyoming would be like." "This valley's special," Xavier agreed, relaxing somewhat. "Good water year-round from the creek, sheltered from the worst winter storms by the hills. Took 5 years of cowboying to save enough for the down payment. It was worth the wait, I'd say." Ramona's gaze traveled over the rolling pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. "You've built something lasting here." "Trying to," Xavier acknowledged, "though a ranch needs more than one man to truly thrive." "You have Miguel," Ramona pointed out, "and a couple of seasonal hands." "But a real ranch needs." Xavier trailed off, unsure why he was sharing such thoughts with Ramona. "A family," she finished quietly. "Children to inherit what you've built." Xavier nodded, uncomfortable with how easily she'd understood his unspoken meaning. "Not much chance of that. Ranching doesn't leave time for courting, even if there were suitable women nearby." "You might be surprised," Ramona said softly. "Life has a way of providing opportunities when least expected." Before Xavier could respond, Martha returned with tea and honey, effectively ending the moment of unexpected intimacy. Yet throughout the day, as Xavier returned to his chores, Ramona's words echoed in his mind. Life providing unexpected opportunities. Like finding a half-dead schoolteacher in the dust, and discovering she might be the most intriguing woman he'd ever met. Over the following week, Ramona's strength returned steadily. Each day, Xavier would carry her to the porch in the morning, then return her to bed in the evening. Their conversations grew longer and more personal, with Ramona sharing stories of her Boston upbringing and Xavier gradually revealing details of his own, past his Texas childhood. His reluctant service in the Confederate cavalry, despite his personal opposition to slavery, and his post-war wanderings before settling in Wyoming. "I never intended to fight," he explained one evening as they watched the sunset from the porch. "But when Texas seceded, they didn't give young men many choices. The war divided so many families," Ramona observed. "My father's business suffered greatly when he refused to supply the Union Army with inferior goods at inflated prices. His principles cost him financially, but he never regretted maintaining his integrity. A man's integrity is about all he can truly call his own in this life," Xavier agreed. "Everything else can be taken away." Ramona studied his profile in the fading light. "You've lost much, haven't you?" Xavier was silent for a long moment. "The war took my younger brother, typhoid in a prison camp. My parents passed within a year of each other after that. The family ranch was seized for taxes." He shrugged as if dismissing the weight of these losses. But that's all ancient history now. Is it? Ramona asked gently. Or is it why you prefer the company of cattle to people? Xavier turned to look at her, surprised by her perception. You ask difficult questions for a schoolteacher. How else does one learn if not by asking questions? Ramona's smile softened her inquiry. Besides, you intrigue me, Xavier Prescott, the solitary rancher who saves strange women and treats them with unfailing kindness. Don't make me out to be some kind of hero, Xavier protested. I did what any decent man would do. Perhaps, Ramona conceded, but I'm beginning to think there's much more to you than you allow others to see. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Xavier stood quickly, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip as he scanned the darkening landscape. Stay here, he instructed Ramona, moving to the edge of the porch for a better view. 3 riders approached the ranch house, their outlines becoming clearer as they drew nearer. Xavier relaxed slightly as he recognized Sheriff Daniels in the lead, accompanied by 2 men he didn't immediately identify. Evening, Prescott, Daniels called as they reached the yard. Brought some visitors who are mighty interested in your guest. The men dismounted, and Xavier recognized Harold Winston from the town council. The 3rd man, tall and distinguished in expensive Eastern clothing, was a stranger. Mr. Prescott, Winston greeted him. We've come to inquire after Miss Everett's recovery. This gentleman is Mr. Jonathan Pierce from Boston. He claims to be Miss Everett's fiancé. Xavier felt Ramona tense beside him, though he hadn't noticed her rise from her chair to join him at the porch railing. Ramona, thank God, the Boston man exclaimed, moving forward. When we received word of the attack, I feared the worst. Ramona's hand found Xavier's arm, gripping it with surprising strength. Mr. Pierce, she acknowledged coldly, you are not my fiancé. As I made clear before leaving Boston, I declined the arrangement my father proposed. Pierce's expression hardened. Your mother disagrees. I've traveled a great distance to bring you home, Ramona. This foolish adventure has gone far enough. My foolish adventure nearly cost me my life, Ramona replied, her voice steady despite the trembling Xavier could feel through her grasp on his arm. And it has only strengthened my resolve not to return to a life where my wishes count for nothing. Winston cleared his throat uncomfortably. Miss Everett, the council is naturally concerned about your welfare. If you wish to return to Boston rather than fulfill your teaching contract, I have every intention of honoring my contract, Ramona interrupted firmly. Once Dr. Sullivan declares me fit for duty. Pierce stepped forward, his handsome face twisted with barely contained anger. Ramona, be reasonable. You can't possibly intend to remain in this wilderness after what you've endured. Your mother is beside herself with worry. My mother knew I had no desire to marry you, yet she encouraged my father's arrangement nonetheless, Ramona replied. I am 22 years old, Mr. Pierce, legally and morally capable of determining my own future. Xavier remained silent throughout this exchange, but his presence beside Ramona seemed to lend her strength. Finally, he spoke. Gentlemen, Miss Everett is still recovering from severe injuries. This conversation can continue another time when she's stronger. Pierce turned his attention to Xavier, sizing him up with obvious disdain. And who exactly are you to make such determinations? I understand you're merely the man who happened upon Ramona after the attack. He's the man who saved my life, Ramona corrected sharply. And has shown me nothing but respect and kindness since, which is more than I can say for you, Mr. Pierce. Sheriff Daniels intervened before the tension could escalate further. It's getting dark, and we should head back to town. Mr. Pierce has taken a room at the hotel, Miss Everett. Perhaps after you've rested, you'll be more amenable to hearing him out. I doubt it, Ramona muttered, though only Xavier heard her. After a few more awkward exchanges, the visitors departed, with Pierce casting a final, possessive glance at Ramona that sent a surge of protectiveness through Xavier. When they were alone again, Ramona's composure crumbled. She swayed slightly, and Xavier quickly guided her back to her chair. "I can't believe he followed me here," she whispered, visibly shaken. "How did he even know where to find me?" "Your mother must have informed him of your whereabouts," Xavier suggested. "Does he have any legitimate claim on you?" Ramona shook her head vehemently. "None whatsoever. There was no formal engagement, only my father's wishes and a gentleman's agreement between them." She looked up at Xavier, fear evident in her eyes. "But Jonathan Pierce is a powerful man in Boston, accustomed to getting what he wants. He won't give up easily." "You don't have to see him again," Xavier assured her. "You can stay here until you're fully recovered, then decide what you want to do. And if what I want is to stay in Hecla and teach as planned, then that's what you'll do," Xavier replied simply. "No one can force you to return to Boston against your will." Ramona studied him thoughtfully. "Why are you so willing to help me, Xavier? You barely know me." Xavier considered her question carefully before answering. "When I found you in the dust, something told me it wasn't your ending I'd discovered, but a beginning. For you, certainly, but perhaps for me as well." He looked away, uncomfortable with his own candor. "Besides, Martha would have my hide if I didn't do right by you." Ramona's smile returned, warming her eyes. "Well, we certainly can't disappoint Martha." That night, Xavier lay awake long after the house had grown quiet, thinking about Ramona and the complicated situation she faced. The appearance of Jonathan Pierce had stirred uncomfortable feelings in Xavier's protectiveness, certainly, but also a jealousy he had no right to feel. Ramona had been under his roof for barely 2 weeks, yet somehow she had breached the walls he'd built around himself since the war. More troubling was the realization that her recovery meant she would soon leave his ranch. Whether she chose to remain in Hecla as the schoolteacher or return to Boston with Pierce, Xavier's role in her life would diminish. The thought left an emptiness he hadn't anticipated. The next morning brought unexpected news. Martha burst into the kitchen where Xavier was having coffee, her expression alarmed. "Riders coming, 6 of them, moving fast," she reported. "And they don't look like they're paying a social call." Xavier was on his feet instantly, grabbing his rifle from its place near the door. "Get Ramona to the root cellar. Lock the door and don't come out until I call for you." As Martha hurried to help Ramona, Xavier positioned himself on the porch, rifle ready. The approaching riders slowed as they entered the yard, spreading out in a manner that confirmed they weren't friendly visitors. 5 rough-looking men, heavily armed and trail-worn, led by a 6th whose neat appearance contrasted sharply with his companions. With a shock of recognition, Xavier realized the well-dressed man was Jonathan Pierce. "Prescott," Pierce called out, "I've come for Miss Everett. I'll be taking her back to Boston where she belongs." "Miss Everett isn't going anywhere she doesn't want to go," Xavier replied evenly, keeping his rifle trained on the group. "And she's made her wishes clear." Pierce's handsome face contorted with anger. "She's confused, traumatized by her ordeal. As her fiancé, it's my responsibility to see to her welfare." "You're not her fiancé," Xavier corrected, "and these men don't look like escorts for a lady's journey." One of the rough men spat tobacco juice into the dust. "We're insurance, Cowboy, in case you decide to be difficult." His hand rested meaningfully on his holstered pistol. Xavier recognized the distinctive scar across the man's neck and felt cold rage wash through him. This was one of Ramona's attackers. "You're making a mistake, Pierce," Xavier warned. "These men are outlaws. The ones who attacked the wagon train and left Ramona for dead." Pierce's expression flickered briefly before hardening again. "Nonsense. These men work for me. I hired them in Cheyenne to help locate Ramona after learning of the attack." "You're either a fool or a liar," Xavier said coldly. The man with the scarred neck, Ramona described him specifically as one of her attackers. The scarred man shifted nervously, exchanging glances with his companions. Pierce's facade began to crumble as he realized his hired guns were indeed the outlaws responsible for the attack. "I didn't know," Pierce insisted, though doubt had crept into his voice. I merely hired men who knew the territory. And how did you know to find her here? Xavier pressed, watching the men carefully for any sudden movements. The sheriff only came yesterday. Pierce's hesitation was damning. I received word from Cheyenne that Ramona had been located at your ranch. But I haven't sent any telegrams to Cheyenne, Xavier pointed out, and neither has the sheriff. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Pierce hadn't merely stumbled upon the outlaws by chance, he'd hired them specifically because they operated in this territory. And if Ramona had described one of them as her attacker, it meant Pierce had orchestrated the entire tragedy. You arranged the attack, Xavier said, his voice deadly quiet. You never expected her to survive, did you? A tragic accident on the frontier, leaving you to console her grieving mother and likely gain control of whatever inheritance Ramona might have. Pierce's composure shattered. She was supposed to be mine. We had an agreement, her father and I. But she refused, embarrassed me in front of all of Boston society. His face twisted with ugly rage. No one refuses Jonathan Pierce. Boss, we should leave, the scarred man urged. This ain't going according to plan. Shut up, Pierce snapped. We're not leaving without the girl. Xavier's finger tightened on the trigger. You're not taking her anywhere. What happened next unfolded with the chaotic speed of a summer lightning storm. One of the outlaws made a sudden move for his pistol, and Xavier fired, hitting the man in the shoulder. Gunshots erupted from multiple directions as the outlaws returned fire. Xavier dove for cover behind a water trough, continuing to fire with deadly accuracy born of wartime experience. Through the chaos, Xavier spotted Pierce dismounting and running toward the house. With cold precision, Xavier aimed and fired, catching Pierce in the leg. The Boston man fell, clutching his bleeding thigh and screaming curses. 3 of the outlaws lay wounded or dead in the yard, while the remaining 2 had retreated behind the barn, pinning Xavier down with sporadic gunfire. The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for the unexpected arrival of Sheriff Daniels and a hastily assembled posse, drawn by the sound of gunfire. "Drop your weapons," Daniels bellowed as his men surrounded the property. The surviving outlaws, recognizing their defeat, surrendered without further resistance. As the sheriff's men secured the prisoners, Xavier hurried to the root cellar to release Martha and Ramona. He found them huddled together in the dim space, Martha clutching a shotgun and Ramona holding a kitchen knife, both prepared to defend themselves if necessary. "It's over," Xavier assured them. "Pierce and his men are in custody." Ramona launched herself into his arms, heedless of her injuries. "We heard the shooting. I thought I feared. I'm fine," Xavier soothed, holding her gently. "And you're safe now, truly safe." As they emerged from the cellar, Ramona caught sight of Pierce being tended to by one of the posse members while Sheriff Daniels stood guard. The Boston man's arrogance had dissolved into pitiful whimpering as his wound was bandaged. "He arranged it all," Xavier explained quietly. "The attack, your supposed death, he admitted as much." Ramona's face paled, "because I refused to marry him." "Pride and greed make for dangerous companions," Martha observed sagely. "Some men can't bear to be denied what they want." Sheriff Daniels approached, his expression grave. "Miss Everett, I'll need your statement about the attack when you're feeling up to it." "These men will face justice for what they've done." "Including Pierce?" Xavier asked pointedly. Daniels nodded. "Conspiracy to commit murder, among other charges. He'll hang alongside the rest if I have anything to say about it." As the prisoners were loaded onto horses for transport to the Hecla jail, Xavier kept a protective arm around Ramona's shoulders. The ordeal had drained what little strength she had regained, and she leaned heavily against him. "You should rest," he murmured, concerned by her pallor. "In a moment," Ramona replied, watching as Pierce was led away. "I need to see them go." Only when the last rider had disappeared down the road did Ramona allow Xavier to guide her back into the house. Martha busied herself preparing tea and checking Ramona for any injuries sustained during their hasty retreat to the cellar. You'll stay here until you're fully recovered, Xavier said firmly. No arguments, Ramona smiled weakly. I wasn't planning to argue. Though I suppose the town council will be anxious for their schoolteacher to begin work before the children forget their letters entirely. The children can wait, Martha declared, placing a steaming cup before Ramona. You need at least another fortnight before you're fit for teaching. Xavier hesitated, then asked the question that had been growing in his mind. And after, will you stay in Hecla as planned? Ramona met his gaze steadily. Do you want me to stay? The directness of her question caught Xavier off guard. Martha, sensing the private nature of the conversation, muttered something about checking on the chickens and discreetly left the kitchen. What I want doesn't matter, Xavier said finally. You came west for independence, to make your own choices without others dictating your future. That's not an answer, Xavier, Ramona persisted gently. Xavier struggled to articulate feelings he'd barely acknowledged to himself. When I found you in the dust, I thought I was witnessing an ending, another life claimed by the harshness of this territory. He paused, gathering his courage. Instead, it became a beginning, for you certainly, but also for me. You woke something in me I thought had died during the war. And what was that? Ramona asked softly. Hope, Xavier admitted. The possibility of something more than just surviving day to day. He met her gaze directly now. Yes, Ramona, I want you to stay, not just in Hecla, but here with me. If that's what you want to. Ramona's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. I came west seeking independence, it's true, but I've discovered that true freedom isn't found in being alone. It's in choosing who to share your life with. She reached for his hand. And I choose you, Xavier Prescott, if you'll have me. Xavier raised her hand to his lips. I'm not an easy man, Ramona. The war left scars that don't show on the outside. And ranching is a hard life, especially for a woman raised in Boston comfort. I'm stronger than I look, Ramona reminded him, and after what I've survived, I think I can manage a few cows and a stubborn rancher. Her expression turned serious. I won't abandon my teaching. Those children need education, but there's no reason I can't be both a teacher and a rancher's wife. Wife, Xavier echoed, a slow smile spreading across his face. That's a mighty presumptuous assumption, Miss Everett. Ramona's eyebrows rose in challenge. Is it, Mr. Prescott? Because I distinctly recall you suggesting I stay here with you. What exactly did you have in mind, if not marriage? Xavier laughed a full, rich sound that seemed to surprise them both. You've got me there. I suppose I did jump ahead a few steps. He sobered, taking both her hands in his. I'm not a man of fancy words, Ramona, but I know what I feel when I'm with you, and it's something I never expected to find out here. If you'll give me time to court you properly, Xavier, Ramona interrupted gently, I've already been left for dead once. Life is too precious and too uncertain for unnecessary delays. She squeezed his hands. Court me if you must, but know that my heart is already decided. 2 months later, as autumn painted the surrounding hills in russet and gold, Xavier Prescott and Ramona Everett were married in Hecla's newly completed church. The town turned out in full force to witness the union of their schoolteacher to the taciturn rancher who had saved her life. Ramona divided her time between teaching in town during the week and helping at the ranch on weekends and holidays. To everyone's surprise, including her own, she took to ranch life with natural aptitude, learning to ride, cook over an open fire, and even assist with calving when necessary. Xavier, for his part, discovered an unexpected talent for school board negotiations, and found himself reluctantly drawn into town affairs through his connection to Ramona. The walls he'd built around himself gradually crumbled as he allowed Ramona to lead him back into the community he'd avoided for so long. Martha Hopkins remained with them, declaring that someone needed to keep things civilized on the ranch. Her cabin was enlarged and improved, becoming her permanent home as she transitioned from housekeeper to beloved family member. 1 year after their wedding, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, now a cherished daily ritual, Ramona placed Xavier's hand over her gently rounded belly. "A new beginning," she said softly, watching his expression transform from confusion to wonder. Xavier gathered his wife into his arms, marveling at how completely his life had changed since that fateful day he'd spotted a seemingly lifeless form in the dust of the Wyoming plains. "When I found you," he murmured against her hair, "I called it a beginning, but I never imagined just how many beginnings we would share." Ramona turned in his embrace to face him. "And many more to come, my love, many more to come." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land they both now called home, Xavier Prescott reflected that some endings were merely disguised beginnings, waiting for someone brave enough to recognize them for what they truly were: opportunities for love to take root in the most unlikely of places, even in the harsh but beautiful wilderness of the American frontier.